The media tells you that they're having honest discussions and debates and that they have differences in policy and principles. The reality is they do exactly what their donors tell them to do. Their headline was, Sanders, we will raise taxes. That's their headline. Okay, most people don't even read the article, let alone watch the top. The CNN anchor, I thought they were neutral. They brag every day. We don't know anything. We're neutral to the facts. I don't know, Republicans say this, Democrats say this. But when it comes to Bernie Sanders, all of a sudden they're not neutral. So that's what the New York Times has turned into. So when we say the establishment media is against Bernie Sanders, we, unlike them, have facts to prove it.
Right? Comcast owns NBC. It's probably one of the most attested companies in the country.
Like, aren't you embarrassed? Aren't you embarrassed? I mean,
how are they not?
Slate says Hillary Clinton won, and right next to it is the poll that the Washington Post came out with a scathing editorial against Bernie Sanders earlier. It was scathing in its opinion and its non-factual basis. Now, headline is, quote, Bernie Sanders' fiction-filled campaign. Oh, that's interesting. It turns out there is no liberal media. Washington Post hates Bernie Sanders.
The Washington Post appears to have given up on that whole journalism thing. Now they're just making stuff up.
Yesterday, we covered the Daily News hatchet job against Bernie Sanders. Let me continue with Associated Press's horrible so-called journalism. If you don't know Politico, as most of you don't, obviously, it's a very establishment publication in Washington. They get a ton of money from corporate interests. This story, this happened recently. There's a headline from Politico.
According to Politico has discovered that a lawmaker,
according to a report from CNN,
investigative reports, one specifically done by the Associated Press.
One of the right-wing attacks against the Washington Post.
More from the Washington Post office. The Washington Post explains. Washington Post writer Christopher Ingram explains. Washington Post starts explaining by Washington Post explains.
At least those were the findings of an expose done by the Washington Post, which was excellent in terms of investigative reporting.
Because the Washington Post had an amazing story today.
Janine Pirro is not that bright, so she's going to make it clear. She was described by the New York Times.
So here are the details on what happened today from the New York Times.
New York Times explains. New York Times with a deep dive into Donald Trump's daily life.
By the way, New York Times reported this over the weekend.
Like, aren't you embarrassed? Aren't you embarrassed? I mean,
how are they not?
Slate said